Tonight, the U.S. takes an extraordinary step to change the course of the war in Ukraine. The Biden administration announcing it will send controversial cluster bombs to Ukraine to bolster its firepower against Putin's forces. Banned across many parts of the world, human rights groups outrage over the weapon's capacity to kill civilians. Ukraine hailing the move as they struggle to repel the Russian invasion. President Biden calling it a difficult decision. The fallout tonight. The El Paso Walmart mass shooter draws 90 life sentences for his hate-driven massacre of 23 people. The emotional response from the victims' families and the troubling white supremacist ideology that connects him and other mass shooters in the headlines, and why he may still face the death penalty. Plus, the dire new weather milestone, the planet reaching record heat for a fourth day in a row. Stifling temperatures across the country. The hikers airlifted to safety from the triple-digit desert as a fresh round of fierce storms brings heavy rains and hail. The nation's new job numbers are in, the labor market cooling off as companies go to extremes to keep employees. Could this mean the end of the Great Resignation? Why are so many more children suffering with kidney stones? What your family needs to know. The new cases of malaria found in the Deep South.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening and welcome. Tonight, the Biden administration appears to be testing the boundaries of modern warfare, announcing it will provide Ukraine with a weapon repudiated by many countries as a danger to civilians. The president approving the shipment of cluster munitions to Ukraine as that country struggles to push back against Russian invaders. Often called cluster bombs, the munitions are designed to scatter bomblets across the battlefield against a variety of targets. But human rights groups warn they are also lethal to civilians who may come across so-called duds, bomblets that fail to explode on initial impact. Russia is said to already use cluster munitions against Ukraine. Asked why now for Ukraine, President Biden saying they're running out of ammunition. Ukraine's President Zelensky thanking the U.S. and calling the latest batch of weapons a timely, broad, and much-needed defense aid package. Courtney Cubie has more from the Pentagon.
Today, the Biden administration announcing it will provide a controversial new weapon to Ukraine, cluster munitions. Ukraine has been asking the U.S. for the cluster bomb since last year. President Biden today explaining why now.
The Ukrainians are running out of ammunition.
Specifically, artillery rounds. Allies struggling to keep them supplied as they fight through a tough counteroffensive.
And so we want to make sure that the Ukrainians have sufficient artillery to keep them in the fight in the context of the current counteroffensive. And because things are going a little slower than some had hoped.
When cluster munitions explode, they scatter dozens of small bombs over a large area, unleashing more widespread destruction than single rounds. Controversial because some of the small bombs may not explode. Embedding in the ground, becoming a threat to civilians, these duds can prove deadly weeks, months, or even years later.
It's a difficult decision. It's a decision we deferred. It's a decision that required a real hard look at the potential harm to civilians.
Officials saying the U.S. will only provide the explosives with a dud rate below 2.35%. More than 100 nations signed the Convention on Cluster Munitions, a treaty outlawing their use, but the U.S. did not.
I discussed this with our allies, discussed this with our friends up on the Hill, and we're in a situation where Ukraine continues to be brutally attacked across the board.
Ukraine assuring the U.S. they would minimize chances of civilian harm by not using the rounds in civilian and urban environments, recording where they use the rounds, and committing to demining areas after the war. The U.S. has roughly 10,000 cluster bombs in Europe ready to send to Ukraine in the coming days.
We will not leave Ukraine defenseless at any point in this conflict, period.
Courtney, how is this decision playing out at home?
Well, there's growing opposition tonight, Lester. Now, U.S. law requires that President Biden sign a waiver before sending these cluster munitions to another country because they have a failure rate above 1%. That waiver is frustrating some lawmakers, including in the president's own party, who just this week introduced new legislation, an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act that would ban the transfer of all cluster munitions. Lester?
Courtney Cubey tonight. Thank you. Let's turn now to Texas, where a 24-year-old man will spend life in prison for the 2019 mass shooting at an El Paso Walmart. The shooting, motivated by hate, is just one of a troubling string of killings over race. Miguel Almaguer reports.
He showed no emotion as the judge sentenced him to 90 consecutive life terms in prison. Patrick Cruces did not address his surviving victims in court today or any of the family members of the 23 men and women he viciously gunned down. Paul Jemrowski lost his daughter and son-in-law.
These lives will never be brought back to life, so how is that justice?
Christopher Morales never said goodbye to his aunt.
He's a pathetic piece of trash. He's a white supremacist, and there's a million of them out there.
The now 24-year-old who pleaded guilty in February to avoid the federal death penalty is a self-described white nationalist.
Let's go.
Run, Mama, run.
Who targeted Hispanics during his killing spree at an El Paso Walmart in 2019. Just before the massacre, he posted a manifesto declaring in part, "This attack is a response to the Hispanic invasion of Texas. I am simply defending my country from cultural and ethnic replacement brought on by the invasion."
We are looking for a voice of reason in a house of madness. We're trying to understand, well, why didn't he do this and why didn't he do that?
The killer's ideology has been shared by other mass shooters. The gunman who murdered 10 at a Buffalo supermarket cited the Great Replacement theory in his manifesto. The racist ideology falsely claims white people are being replaced by minorities, which was also referenced by the Pittsburgh synagogue shooter. In an average year, over 25,000 hate crimes in the U.S. involve a firearm. Heartbreak measured one family at a time. 15-year-old Javier Rodriguez was the youngest to die in El Paso. His father brought his photo to court,
so that he can see who he killed. He killed a 15-year-old. He didn't even know him. That's why.
Tonight, the gunman will spend life in prison as the victims' families endure a lifetime of heartbreak.
You know, Miguel, I remember vividly traveling there and covering that story, the sense of heartbreak still being felt there today. So what we've seen now is the end of the federal process, but there's still potentially a state prosecution.
There certainly is, Lester, and while he avoided the federal death penalty with that plea deal, state prosecutors could still pursue the death penalty in their case. That process is expected to take months to play out.
All right, Miguel, thanks very much. It is almost hard to imagine that for the fourth night in a row, we are once again reporting on a dire weather milestone. But yet again, the planet has hit another day of record heat as new storms roll across this country. Here's Jesse Kirsch.
With cars caught in floodwaters near the nation's capital, mudslides in Vermont, and overnight hail roughly as big as baseballs crashing down in Colorado, tonight a wild weather week isn't over, though some Americans are getting relief. Extreme heat threatening 20 million people across the U.S. That's down from Thursday's 24 million, but still dangerous for many, with parts of Florida and the Southwest most at risk.
Yeah, unfortunately, no relief in sight for us with the way things are stacking up so far.
Phoenix topping 110 degrees for the 7th day in a row. El Paso now recording triple-digit temps every day for more than 3 weeks straight.
Buddy, hey, can you hear me, man?
And newly released video from outside Tucson shows what officials say are 2 Americans suffering from heat stress being rescued by helicopter. Sweltering heat impacting the U.S. and the world. Over the past 4 days, we've seen a new estimated record for the hottest global average temperature set, shattered, and broken again. Meanwhile, across the plains, severe weather's threatening 8 million people from Denver to Little Rock, Arkansas. 2-inch hail, 75-mile-per-hour winds, and isolated tornadoes possible. And further east, flood risks continue from northern New England down to Washington, D.C.
Other cities like Chicago are finally cooling down, but the threat of extreme heat and storms will continue to rock some parts of the country for days to come, especially on Sunday, with 46 million people possibly seeing severe weather from the Gulf Coast to the mid-Atlantic. Lester?
All right, Jesse, thank you. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is in Beijing tonight. It's a high-stakes trip to reduce simmering tensions between the world's 2 economic superpowers. Andrea Mitchell joining me now from Washington, D.C. Andrea, what is Yellen's message to China?
Well, Lester, the Treasury Secretary is walking a tightrope. She's scolding China today for raiding American businesses that China has wrongly accused of spying and for imposing export controls on critical minerals used to produce chips, seen as a tit for tat for President Biden's legislation boosting the U.S. semiconductor industry. At the same time, though, Yellen told her Chinese counterpart today that the world's two largest economies should not allow any disagreement to lead to misunderstandings that unnecessarily worsen their relationship. Secretary Yellen is, of course, the latest cabinet official to visit China after Secretary of State Blinken's visit just last month, as the U.S. tries to reduce historic tensions between Washington and Beijing. China has still not agreed, though, to restore military-to-military communications that are so critical to avoid accidental confrontations. Lester.
Andrea, thank you. Tonight, we're going to get a closer look at the mercenary group that helped Russia fight its war with Ukraine before its rogue leader launched a rebellion. Here's Richard Engel with a preview of his special on the rise and fall of the Wagner Group.
Russia may look like a state, but those who know it well say under President Vladimir Putin, it's become a mafia, armed with nuclear weapons. And on June 24th, Putin faced the biggest challenge to his authority in his more than 2 decades in power. A member of his trusted inner circle dared to revolt and marched his army of mercenaries into Russia.
There was a mutiny against Vladimir Putin's armed forces.
Vladimir Putin was rattled and seemed to be caught off guard.
Prigozhin is entirely a creature of Vladimir Putin. He does not exist without Putin. This is a Frankenstein-like scenario.
I've been following Prigozhin's extraordinary rise for years and seen firsthand how the one-time petty thief built a criminal empire in Syria, Africa, Russia, and Ukraine, making him powerful enough to challenge the boss.
It's like a thriller, so we know that there's more to come. It's to be continued.
It seems President Putin underestimated Prigozhin, failing to appreciate how powerful and how angry his underling had become.
Richard Engel, thanks. You can see more of Richard's reporting on the trajectory of Wagner Group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin tonight at 11 Eastern on MSNBC. In 60 seconds, between companies spending millions to keep workers working and a cooling job market, is it the end of the Great Resignation? Plus, why more kids are getting kidney stones. What do you need to know? The unemployment rate fell 0.1 of a point in June to 3.6%, but job creation slowed. And after what was called the Great Resignation, Hallie Jackson reports more workers are resigned to staying where they are.
At Pella Windows in southeast Iowa, they need their workers and they need to keep them.
Employee retention is absolutely top of mind. It's certainly one of our top priorities as a company.
So the company, over the past few years, has spent about $30 million on housing, child care centers, and restaurants in the small town where it's based, and offered signing bonuses for certain positions. Now the company says retention rates are up 36% from the year before.
We have the team members that we need at this point moving forward as compared to the high demand and needs during the pandemic.
Pella is clearly not alone. As the economy added 209,000 jobs last month, new government numbers show in May job openings were down nearly 20% from their peak in March of last year. And while some 4 million people quit their jobs in May, that number's also trending down 11% from its pandemic peak. To put it in plain English, workers haven't quit quitting, but the so-called Great Resignation is not as great as it once was.
Quitting is coming down. The rate at which we were seeing people leave their jobs during the height of the Great Resignation, those days are behind us.
That's partly because there aren't quite as many jobs out there for people to switch to. And some workers, they're just happy where they are. Take Madison Velez, who's been at Paws and Rec Doggy Daycare in Tampa, Florida for 5 years.
I have a lot of trust and faith in the people who run the company that I work for. And I think that's a huge part of employee retention, especially at a time like this when things are so unknown.
Experts say the labor market is still strong, but cooling off a bit. That is a key factor for the Fed, which meets later this month. It's widely expected to raise interest rates. The question is by how much and how many times? Lester?
Hallie Jackson, thank you. We're back in a moment with Dr. John Torres and why we're seeing a concerning increase of kidney stones in children. Tonight, health officials in Florida are reporting 2 more cases of malaria in Sarasota County, bringing the total there since May to 6. It's rare to see the disease in the U.S., and officials are advising residents in Florida and Texas to use insect repellent and stay inside at dawn and dusk, when the mosquitoes that spread the disease are most likely to bite. With rising temperatures across the country comes an increasing risk of kidney stones, and not just in older men anymore, but now in younger children, too. Here's our senior medical correspondent, Dr. John Torres.
Today, Chloe Carroll is a healthy teen. She loves sports and dance. But when she was 8 years old, she had the scare of a young person's lifetime.
I think I was at a dance recital and I found blood in my urine. I was like, I don't know what's going on right now.
Then came the surprising diagnosis, kidney stone disease.
She was 8 years old. What went through your mind?
Well, the first thing was, how is that possible? She's an athlete, she's active, she eats well, she drinks as much water as any other normal 8-year-old does.
Kidney stones are hard deposits made from minerals and salt that can be extremely painful and dangerous when caught in the urinary tract. They're most common in middle-aged men, but research shows incidence of pediatric stone disease is rising as much as 10% a year.
3 millimeters is all you need. Incredibly painful.
Dr. Gregory Kajian, a pediatric urologist at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, is trying to figure out why.
Now we're seeing disease occurring earlier in life, and then that gender gap has disappeared.
Kajian says most of the cases he sees, teenage girls.
In the ER, I'm used to seeing this image, but on a 45-year-old man.
So this is an image of a 15-year-old girl.
Doctors don't know for certain what's causing the increase, but believe a combination of factors could be to blame, including kids eating too many ultra-processed foods, too many antibiotics given early in life, and even climate change causing more dehydration.
Stones are associated with tremendous impacts on health. Higher risk of fracture, higher risk of high blood pressure, higher risk of loss of kidney function.
To prevent kidney stones, experts say drink plenty of water, avoid too many sweetened beverages, and reduce salt intake.
Hi.
Chloe, now 14, has had 3 surgeries to remove stones over the years.
Okay. It's like annoying having to slow down everything when I'm just trying to go back to normal.
Can it be overwhelming?
A lot, yeah.
She's using her own experience to help other kids with similar diagnoses, determined not to let the stones win.
So, Dr. John, thinking that it's usually middle-aged men, parents might not even think kidney stones when it comes to their kids. So what signs should they be looking for?
Like Chloe said, blood in the urine is a big sign, so you want your kids to tell you if they notice that. And watch for pain in the mid-back, especially if they also get nausea with it. With those symptoms, kids should see their doctor and possibly get checked with an ultrasound. Lester?
Dr. Torres, thanks very much. And that is Nightly News for this Friday. Tomorrow morning, tune in to Nightly News Kids Edition right here on NBC. Thank you for watching, everyone. I'm Lester Holt. Please take care of yourself and each other. Good night. Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.